Tune into ESG Matters with Risk Insights, where we explore ESG with impact. Welcome to ESG Matters with Risk Insights. I'm your host, Dr. Anushka Bogdanov. We are living through a period of profound institutional fracture. Around the world, tensions are rising. Trust in leadership is eroding, and markets are responding not simply to economic signals, but to something far deeper, a failure of governance and moral authority. Today we see war unfolding in the Middle East. At the same time, elite scandals continue to shake public confidence in institutions. Markets are volatile, currencies are moving sharply, and investors are increasingly cautious. These events appear unrelated at first glance, but they are connected by a common thread. They reveal weaknesses in the institutional architecture that underpins stability, credibility, and ultimately economic order. What we are witnessing is not simply geopolitical turbulence. It is a reminder that systems of governance matter. It is a reminder that moral architecture matters. And when those foundations weaken, economic instability eventually follows. In early March 2026, long-standing strategic rivalries escalated into open confrontation involving Iran, Israel, and the United States of America. Airstrikes targeted Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure, and retaliatory missile and drone attacks followed. Tension spread quickly across the region, and shipping routes in the Gulf came under immediate pressure. This matters because the Middle East sits at the center of global energy infrastructure. The Strait of Hormuz alone carries roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. Any disruption to that corridor immediately sends signals through the energy markets, shipping routes, insurance costs, and global supply chains. This is not simply a regional military confrontation. It is a systemic shock. It is an energy shock, a supply chain shock, and ultimately a capital market shock. Wars rarely begin suddenly. They are usually the outcome of accumulated distrust, unresolved political tensions, ideological rigidity, and diplomatic systems that have slowly eroded over time. When diplomacy weakens, conflicts become more likely and markets begin to reprice risk. At the same time, global reactions to the crimes associated with Jeffrey Epstein have exposed something equally troubling in a different sphere of society. The scandal revealed systems that protected influence over accountability, reputation over justice, and power over transparency. It forced the public to confront uncomfortable questions about how elite networks operate and how institutions respond when those networks are implicated. Markets cannot function without trust. Institutions cannot function without credibility. And when systems appear to protect power rather than enforce accountability, that damage extends far beyond public outrage. It affects confidence, and confidence is one of the most valuable forms of capital any society possesses. Capital flows towards systems where governance is credible, and it retreats from systems where institutions appear compromised. The erosion of trust, therefore, has economic consequences, and not just social ones. The connection between geopolitical conflict and governance scandals becomes clearer when we examine the underlying variable that links them, and that variable is trust. When trust in institutions erodes, diplomatic channels weaken, political polarization deepens, and global tensions escalate more rapidly. Markets begin to adjust, and risk is repriced across regions and asset classes. For Africa, these global shifts are not abstract developments. they are felt almost immediately. If instability disrupts the Strait of Hormuz, Africa absorbs the shock quickly. The continent imports significant volumes of energy, refined petroleum products, and agricultural inputs. When oil prices rise, fuel costs increase, transport costs rise, food inflation accelerates, and currencies often weaken. For oil importing economies such as Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Senegal, fiscal pressure intensifies. Oil exporting economies such as Nigeria, Angola, and Algeria may experience short-term revenue gains, but volatility rarely supports stable long-term investment. In reality, unpredictable commodity markets discourage the kind of capital formation needed for sustainable development. This is not simply a commodity story. It is fundamentally a capital allocation story. Supply chain disruptions also affect fertilizer prices and agricultural inputs. Higher input costs reduce yields, which in turn raises food prices. In climate vulnerable economies, this becomes more than an economic issue. It becomes a social stability risk. In periods of global conflict, investors typically move towards perceived safe havens. Emerging markets often experience capital outflows, currency depreciation, and higher borrowing costs. Even when African countries are not directly involved in a conflict, their markets are often repriced by association. This phenomenon can be understood as capital gravity. Global shocks pull capital towards perceived stability and away from uncertainty. Yet within this challenge lies a strategic opportunity. As supply chains fragment and global powers seek greater resource security, certain minerals become increasingly strategic. Cobalt, lithium, manganese, and platinum are central to the technologies that will shape the next phase of industrial and energy systems. Africa holds significant reserves of many of these resources. This creates geopolitical leverage. But leverage only translates into economic value when governance is credible and institutions function effectively. Without credible governance frameworks, external actors will simply price the opportunity on Africa's behalf. South Africa also sits at a complex geopolitical intersection. It is a member of BRICS. It maintains trade relationships with the United States through AGOA, and it has also taken visible diplomatic positions on several global conflicts. In an increasingly fragmented world, geopolitical alignment carries economic implications. Neutrality without strategy can easily be interpreted as ambiguity, and markets tend to price ambiguity quickly. Energy markets may respond in complex ways. Higher oil prices may briefly support fossil fuel revenues and reduce short-term incentives for decarbonization. At the same time, global capital may accelerate investments into energy security, energy storage technologies, and hydrogen and green infrastructure. For Africa, the strategic question is not whether the continent will be affected by these global shifts. It naturally will be. The real question is whether Africa uses these moments of disruption to strengthen institutional credibility, accelerate regional integration, and leverage its strategic resources with greater coherence and governance discipline. In a fragmented world, perception becomes price, and price becomes power. The Middle East may be the theater of conflict, but Africa and South Africa sit firmly within the architecture of consequence. The question therefore becomes simple. Will we remain observers of global pricing, Or will we become architects of our own capital narrative? Thank you for joining me. Ciao for now.